Before we get started today, just a quick disclaimer. All views expressed are our own and do not indicate the opinions of any employers or clients for whom we work. The recommendations or advice given in this podcast may or may not be right for you, depending on the circumstances. Please bear this in mind before taking any action. Hello and welcome to Charting Tracks. I'm Chris O'Gorman. I'm joined today by my wonderful co-hosts Amir Yaqub and Ben Hennessy-Garside. Amir is a producer, engineer, Grammy winner, co-owner of Bison Production Studios and director of Garnish Music London. Ben is a highly esteemed voice coach, multi-instrumentalist, composer and producer, as well as being a music lecturer at Leeds Conservatoire, where he teaches the popular music course and has also worked as an A&R scout. I am Chris. I'm a digital marketing strategist. I was formerly head of digital at Capitol Records UK. I've also worked at Sony Music, where I was a digital marketing manager. I've also been a music journalist and I now run artist development, branding and marketing consultancy for developing artists. And today, on this episode, we are going to be talking about building a fan base. So we've previously on episodes before this discussed about artists' early development, defining their artist brand, their artist identity, their sound. So this at the stage of a building fan base now, we're at the stage in the artist's growth in their sort of development where they have their artist identity broadly defined, they have their sound, they maybe have a live act, and now they want to bring that to an audience and build a fan base. So how do they do it? And that's going to be the subject today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the kind of building blocks are for building a fan base and where to start, you know, when you're actually trying to find a fan base. And the first thing is actually to ask some key questions. And I think this is something that artists maybe don't do straight away. They, you know, kind of stumble upon it. But actually, I think it's a helpful thing to do is to actually ask these key questions. And the first one is, what does your audience actually look like? Who would your audience be? And that can begin with, okay, well, what other artists am I like? What if I was to compare myself with other artists? And most artists don't want to do this because they always want to say, oh, I'm not quite like anything, you know. Nobody wants to hear that. What they want to hear is, I'm a little bit like that compared with that, or that crossed with that. And I think I've said that in previous episodes, where you can say, this is broadly what I'm like, and these would be some of the similar artists that I would like to compare myself to. And then you think, okay, so what does those artists, what are the characteristics they have in common? So it's things like, what stage of life are they at? Broadly, what ages do they tend to be? And these are all generalizations, and obviously there are always exceptions to this. So it's not so much that this is the hard and fast, but it's what are the patterns that you tend to see? And I think then you start looking at what their behaviors are on online, what their behaviors are in the real world. And I think the thing to just zoom out for a second, just go, okay, well, what is an audience? What is a fan base? You know, what are the elements of that? And obviously a fan base is when somebody has bought into you, and I don't mean paid, I mean, although often it does mean that, I mean, they like you as an artist to the point where they want to follow you on social media, they want to sign up to your mailing list, they want to stream your music, they are engaged with you on an ongoing basis. And that's the difference between a fan and somebody that's just hearing your music. But to become a fan, you have to reach that person in the first place. And so what I want to talk about just briefly is what the music buying audience or the music consuming audience looks like and how you break it down. And in my time working at Universal and at Sony, as well as my consultancy work now, there's some fundamentals that I've kind of worked with in sort of looking at the music consuming audience. And that is that there are essentially 4 key types of music audience. So, and number one, so there's the fanatics, there's enthusiasts, there's casuals, and then there's indifferents. So Fanatics obviously goes pretty much, it's pretty obvious, does what it says on the tin. These are the people that are extremely invested in music, are probably musicians themselves, or at least aspiring musicians in some way. They are the first to kind of find out about a new artist. They tend to be the person in their friendship group that finds out about new artists and new bands before anybody else does. And they're the ones that the rest of their friends look to. They're the ones that are going to be on music industry blogs. They're going to be hyper invested in new talent, new music. They're going to know what's going on. Then there's the enthusiasts who are still very engaged, very, again, they probably read the blog, they probably listen to specialist radio, but they're not quite as intense, and they're probably not going to be musicians themselves, but they are. Music makes up a lot of their identity. It's still a big part of who they are. So there'll be festival goers, they'll go to gigs a lot. They'll be a little bit more informed in terms of their music discovery by kind of what's hot and what's coming up, and they'll look to the Fanatics for that. Then there's the casuals, and these are the people that generally aren't, music's part of their life, but it's not the thing that, it's not a core driver for them. So they'll tend to engage with what's on commercial radio, what's in the charts, what they see on TV, and they'll have a few artists that they like, but they're not going out trying to find the newest artist. They're not, they'll go to gigs and stuff, but it'll be once that artist has probably already got a little bit of mainstream success and some general awareness. So they'll tend to be more about not necessarily just the sort of charts, but they'll be kind of what's in the mainstream media. And I hate that phrase, but it is what it is. And then there's the fourth segment, which is the indifferents. And these are the people that they might buy one album a year, 2 albums a year tops. Music is a very small part of their life, but there'll be 1 or 2 artists that they love. And they'll come back to that. And I'd say somebody like my mum's probably fits into this segment, actually. Like, she's got the artists that she loves, and if they bring out an album, she's probably going to buy it. If that particular artist, so like Barbra Streisand, for instance, my mum will be all about Barbra Streisand. If Barbra Streisand brings something out, she's going to buy it. If Celine Dion does, she's going to buy it. But other than that, it will probably just be the biggest new release of that year. And that's, again, this is really like, there are completely bits in between this. There's people that maybe traverse some of these areas, but that's sort of like the principles of what a music consuming audience looks like. And they can have, they kind of range from different genres across those sort of across those 4 verticals. They range in age ranges, of course. I mean, what we look at being a music consuming audience is anyone that's going to pay to download or stream or buy a ticket, generally speaking. How does that, so that's my kind of view of it, of my evil record label, view of it, of putting people into these columns and, then drilling further down into the audience demographics, what blogs they listen to, what blogs they read, what radio stations they listen to, what social media networks they tend to be on. And as I go through this in a bit more detail, you'll see that there tends to be trends. But how does that stack up with you, Ben, and you, Amir, when you think about artists and when you're working with artists, how much awareness of that, how much awareness would you say that they have of the music consuming audience and who their audience is?
Right. So some of my students, like, they get it, and they accept that, but lots and lots of them, and I've been here myself as well, feel there's something kind of almost evil about that, like taking people and putting them in categories. And I mean, in a way, there kind of is, right? Because there's, you know, we live in a fairly liberal society, so there's stuff around letting people be whoever they are and not boxing people in and not making assumptions. You know, this thing about judging people, and there's a fear that in the act of taking potential fans and categorizing them in the way that you've talked about, there's something dehumanizing about that. You know, as far as dealing with your fans is concerned. I think the truth is it kind of is dehumanizing, but then the other truth is, well, what else are we going to do? And we need some kind of framework so that we can navigate it. So, and I think this is the key. It's like if somebody comes to your gig and they don't happen to sit within whatever framework you're using to categorize people, they don't happen to sit within that framework. It's not like you're going to send them away and be like, no, you're not a fanatic. You know, the musicians, the fans that I'm attracting are fanatics only. And if you aren't a fanatic and you don't tick all those boxes and you come to one of my gigs, then I'm going to kick you out. No one is suggesting that, right? That's the first thing. Like if somebody wants to give you money, you take their money.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Come one, come all.
And if somebody,
please buy something.
All right. And if somebody loves your stuff and is moved by it and wants to participate in whatever it is that you're doing, you know, like let's just ditch the whole money thing, right? It's if they're wanting to reach you, reach out to you, and listen to your stuff and kind of be in communication with you, then no one anywhere is saying don't communicate with those people. I think the main reason for all this is that like there's just too much world to focus on. You can't be all things to all people, and that's just a truth. And so one of the things that humans do when there's just too much world to deal with is we start creating categories to help us cope with reality. And so this is just an example of that, right? It's like, you know, in the UK market is potentially everybody in it, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, we're talking, what, 60 million people?
Yeah.
Right.
62 million, 63 million, something like that, I think.
So,
yeah.
And
actually, it's interesting that you said population size, just because I have a breakdown here.
Okay.
Because I think it's interesting. So,
yeah.
I think you said, so let's say, give or take, like 2 million. Say we're talking broadly 60 million people. The Fanatics make up 5 million, and this is just in the UK. The Enthusiasts make up 11 million. Casuals make up 12 million, and Indifferents make up 16 million.
Wow.
So it doesn't quite add up exactly, because then you go, hang on, so there's something beyond indifferent, which is weird to think. But
sort of like children, isn't there, or something? Cause
so there'll be people that aren't it doesn't catch exactly. So anybody sort of, and generally kind of traditionally, labels have looked at this, marketing teams have looked at this as ages 15 and upwards. Actually, it's 13 and upwards now, and the reason for that is that the age at which you can legitimately sign up to be on a social media network for most of the core channels is 13. So they look at anybody 13 and up as a potential music fan, even though obviously you could be younger than that.
Yeah,
they don't get included in the in the sort of audience data.
Yeah. So 5 million, and we're talking about roughly 60 million. So that's 1/12. One in 12 people would sit within the fanatic category, right? Yeah. And then did you say 11?
11 million
so
is the next one, which is the Enthusiasts.
Very, very roughly then 1 in 6, and then very, very roughly kind of the same again for the next category.
Casuals at 12 million.
Casuals at 12, and then
Indifferents have the largest, which is 16 million.
Yeah. So you're talking about roughly a quarter there, then, aren't you, of the total population?
Yeah.
Of people.
So there's that, and I think when you think about it in those terms, it's like, oh wow, because obviously there's people that are aware of music and will hear it in their day. You know, they'll hear it on the radio in the office, they'll hear it on their commute, but they may not be, particularly engaging with it. And so those people, I think you're going to go, okay, where do you start when you're trying to build a fan base? And I think it's about starting with zooming. So that's the big zoomed out version of music audience. Okay, so let's zoom all the way in and go, well, where's my audience going to be? Where, to do that, you have to take a step back yet again and think, well, what does a typical fan of me as the artist, what do they look like? What would you build a profile of them, and it starts with what other acts do they like? What would they tend to like? Because, and again, this is a generalization, but people do tend to gravitate towards certain genres, or they tend to gravitate towards a certain aesthetic. And obviously there's people that are, so with the Fanatics, this is an interesting thing about how the different audience segments compare to each other. Fanatics are genre agnostic. They really are very open-minded with music. Sometimes they like, this is what I really love, but they'll be very open-minded. If something is good, they're more concerned with, is it really good? And is it what they see is it hot? Is it something new? Is it something interesting? The enthusiasts are they're still fairly genre agnostic as well. It's more like, is it cool? Am I supposed to be liking it? Is it cool? Okay, cool. They want to be seen to be on that trend. And the enthusiasts will actually, unlike the fanatics are a bit more likely to stay with an act. So I got this my act now, I discovered them. With the enthusiasts, it's more about, they're, in the BBC sound poll or something. So, but as soon as that artist then becomes a bit more mainstream, and actually they kind of get over it and they're like, okay, next thing, I want to find the next thing. So that they don't tend to stay with that artist, which is interesting, because obviously we call them the hype makers because they are very good at making hype, but they don't stay with that artist. So they wouldn't necessarily they'll make a load of noise, but they won't continue the journey necessarily because they're always on the hunt for what's next. Then with the casuals, they are less genre agnostic, and actually for something to break through with them, it's probably going to be in a certain area. It's going to be in a certain genre of music that they happen to just like. And again, there's always exceptions to these.
Yeah.
But you have to find a starting ground, Yeah. And I think that's the way to start with when you're building a fan profile, is to literally list down, okay, what would my fan look like? What other bands and artists do they like? How old are they generally? And again, it's not, and a lot of artists I work with kind of go, but they're not just one person. And it's like, okay, well, what would the top 3 types of fan be? So your primary audience, your secondary audience, and your sort of tertiary audience. Because that way, then you go, okay, I'm not excluding anyone, but these are the most likely people. These are the second most likely people. And these are the third most likely people. Then you can start narrowing in on where they are, because once you've defined who they are, then you need to go to them. And that's when so for instance, if I was to say, I'm a Radio 2 friendly act, I'm 30-something, singer-songwriter, acousticy kind of thing. And I was to say, okay, well, I'm going to put all of I'm going to promote myself on TikTok and not anywhere else. You probably go, that's probably not where you're going to find most of your fans. Again, there might be an exception. Sometimes stuff trends on there just completely out of nowhere. But generally speaking, you'd be like, most of your fan base is probably going to be on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. It's probably going to be a bit more of a, I wouldn't then go, I want to be on Radio X, because you'd be like, that's, more for rock acts.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If I was, a new pop act, a very new, young up and coming pop act, I wouldn't necessarily go and say, okay, well, I'm going to try and target the indifferent people that listen to Susan Boyle.
Yeah.
So it's, so this is the kind of advice that I give to artists when I'm working with them, about looking at building a fan profile and trying to figure out broadly, what age groups are they? What other artists do they like and listen to? What brands maybe do they tend to like? Because you can start seeing through lines in behavior. So like, for instance, I was saying like earlier with like younger, like look, the TikTok audience, for instance, that's their number one platform of music discovery now. And they're kind of, ages anything from sort of 13 up until about 20, generally speaking. And Spotify isn't their main platform they consume music on. SoundCloud certainly isn't. Radio certainly isn't. YouTube is, but TikTok is really their main form of music discovery. And they don't consume traditional media in the same way. So when you're an artist and you're putting together a marketing campaign, you're like, you're probably not going to spend loads of time hiring a radio plugger to try and get you on, traditional radio stations, because actually that's not where those audiences are.
Yeah.
And I think that's, well, I mean, when I discuss this with artists, it starts coming into focus for them, I think.
Yeah, and it's about resources, isn't it? It's like you've only got a certain number of resources.
If you're an independent artist, particularly, yeah. When you're signed, you've got a whole lot of...
Well, you've got money, perhaps a bit less time.
And even then, you're going to put your resources where they are
most
likely to be beneficial.
Yeah. Everyone has some form of limitation on what they can, like if you're throwing your dart or you're throwing your ball at a target, right? You got to know which direction to throw it in. Yeah. And so it's about narrowing down, really lasering in on the place that's your place, to at least to begin with. I do think that at some point you're going to need to start reviewing the actions that you've taken, so that allowing the fan base to feed back, I think my intuition is that that's becoming more and more important.
Yeah,
that it's more and more of a dialogue between yourself and your fans, and just checking that you've got the right thing, because you might find that initially you think it's going to be this sort of people that like your stuff, and then you discover that there are kind of these other people that are into it. So keeping an eye open for the ways in which your initial thoughts were a bit wrong all the way through the process, I think is important. Just holding the door open for that stuff. But yeah, like to start with, you've got to pick a place to be and then try and be there, right? Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, absolutely. I think that's absolutely it. It's that you need to, you kind of have to put your flag in the ground, and you can take it out and move it afterwards. And that's when what comes back to the plan, do, and review. Sort of system. So I want to talk about, so one of the things we said, what you need to do is identify what your audience is. So first, what the really broad brush music audience is. Then where does your tribe fit within that? Then you've kind of got that figured out. Okay, so I know that they're broadly this age and they're on these platforms and this is where they spend their time. They read these music blogs. Then it's, okay, now how do I reach them? How do I get to them? And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is this traditional, and now this is because of I want to talk about the traditional promo team. And then I want to talk about how it's changed and how you guys think it has changed and what the changes are. So from my experience, this is the standard artist promo team. So you got the artists themselves, because they're a pretty important part. Yeah? Then generally you'd have, and this like going from sort of the most traditional round, I suppose, these are the people that be sat around the boardroom table at an artist planning session, planning meeting at the label. You've got the artist, obviously got the manager, got a radio plugger. So that person obviously gets music on the radio, they plug it to radio stations. It's that simple. So there tends to be a regional radio plugger that will sort of hit up all of those, local news stations like, BBC Manchester, BBC Lancashire, Radio Plymouth, those kind of local stations. And then there'll be a national radio plugger that will, be targeting Capital FM and Heart and Magic and Radio 1, Radio 2. Then you'll have a TV plugger who is in charge of getting the music on radio. In charge of getting the music on TV. So that's either getting the artist on a TV show to do a performance, like on Graham Norton or Jonathan Ross or X Factor, but also get the music serviced to TV shows to have the music on in the background. So having it on Love Island or something or EastEnders, or getting it on, getting placements basically for the music, because especially like one of the biggest drivers actually is, I mentioned Love Island a minute ago, is actually one of the biggest music discovery, that and Made in Chelsea. And The Only Way is Essex are huge drivers of music discovery, and a lot of the Shazams that kind of happen are because somebody was watching those shows, heard a song, liked it, and Shazammed it, and so it's actually a huge thing to get on those shows.
Wow.
For certain acts, obviously for certain acts it's not appropriate, and this comes back to defining your audience. Then there's online press and print press. So again, getting blogs coverage, getting sort of music industry publication like Rolling Stone and Complex Mag, Rewind Mag, etc., like the more music focused ones, and the more mainstream lifestyle magazines and newspapers and news sites. Then there's club promo, and obviously that does what it says on the tin, is getting the music played in clubs, getting it on DJs playlists. And then there's the paid advertising side of this, and these days this, traditionally it's been sort of TV advertising. So literally when you're in the middle of watching Coronation Street and you get your ad breaks and stuff, and then an ad for the big artist of that year will probably pop up somewhere, normally in the run up to Christmas. Radio advertising as well, so the paid for advertising space within commercial radio, and then the out of home advertising, which is like the posters and billboards and banner ads on the tube stations, etc., all of those things. And then obviously one of the biggest parts of it now is the paid digital and paid social side, which is your Facebook ads and your YouTube pre-rolls and all of that. So those are the sort of core promotional verticals. Obviously some of those more digitally focused ones have kind of developed as we've become a more digitally focused industry. And then things like playlist pluggers have now emerged over the last few years, where it's become more about getting on Spotify playlists, getting on Amazon playlists, getting on YouTube playlists. So that's kind of a new role that's, well, I mean, I say new, the last few years, last 4 or 5 years, but new in the terms of the wider industry, which hasn't really changed that much. Like radio pluggers and TV pluggers go back to the 30s. Radio pluggers do anyway, 30s and 40s.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's like the broad brush. And what I kind of wanted to do is just get your thoughts on artists when you're working with them, because normally we sort of put them through this machine, and they don't necessarily they know that all of these things, or they broadly know that these things exist, but I think a lot of the artists that we're probably going to be talking to are sort of maybe independent artists, and maybe this is kind of what you have when you've got a label behind you, and that's sort of the label machine, and the label kind of handles all of that. But how do independent artists get on these channels? How do independent artists, they're obviously not going to be able to afford to run loads of TV advertising, etc. So how do they promote themselves, and how do they reach these people?
What do you think, Amir? What do you think, Amir, to that?
Well, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about finding your audience and your tribe and all of these kind of people by looking at where is appropriate, let's put it that way, to be trying to reach out and build your fan base. But for me, I think the thing that's being really screamed throughout a lot of this is strategy and kind of thinking about a strategy, because like you said, we could have all of the money in the world and we can be like, we're just going to get everyone to put this out as much as they can. Whereas you might waste your money doing that, one thing, and that might be a considerable amount of money that you could have doubled down somewhere else and put into that. Now, obviously, one of the big things that comes up is without the infrastructure of a label, for instance, how do we go about finding the people who are going to help us to do such things? How are we going to find TV pluggers, radio pluggers, all of that kind of stuff? And I think this speaks to stuff that we said before, where we say, we're now in a space and time where people are doing much more independent stuff. Of course, if you're an independent artist, you are doing your own thing. And it's the same with independent PR people, freelance radio playlist pluggers, or whoever else. I think it's, for many people, it's really just a good idea to think about where they want to go, who's going to be there, and how they're going to get there. When we're talking about putting music out, like you said, reality TV shows might be very inappropriate for certain artists, so that you're not even going to bother looking there. If you get it, great. On the off chance that you get it, that's fantastic. But I would say have a strategy and be clever and know that you can reach many of the service that labels already have.
Absolutely. That's a good point, Amir, actually, is because as the industry's sort of become more democratized with streaming and with, artists to fan direct sort of tools, Spotify for artists, etc., and things like that, and TuneCore and DistroKid and AWOL and
yeah, of course,
many other distributors that exist, that you can release your music direct to the fan without going through that channel. And what labels bring to the table really is obviously the checkbook, the marketing spend, but also the infrastructure, the huge infrastructure that they have, and the relationships with playlist owners and radio, radio companies and all of the various promo team members that we talked about. How I'm interested, when you have artists that come through your door, Amir, and yours, Ben, do you get a sense that they are thinking about that already? Like how they're making their music and then they're getting it recorded. Now what? Do you get a sense that they have an idea of how they're going to take that music to market?
I found by the time they get to me, I'll answer this first. I find by the time they get to me and doing production, recording, all of that kind of stuff, they've got a good idea. They've got a good idea. Those people who are serious about stuff, they know essentially what they need to do after the record is done. And many times something will land with me. It might be a mix. It might be a production. It'll be like, right, well, we've got to get this out to the PR people. So they have a 6-week lead time on the release. And they've already actually got a whole thing planned out. So I tend to find the people who are properly serious, and that tends to be, the majority of people that I work with, they already kind of know what they're doing. They might not know down to a T what's going on. They might not have thought all of the different things that they can do. However, that's by the by, because at least they're thinking about it in that kind of way. Oftentimes, maybe when you're younger in your career, maybe when you're less informed or you might not have such a good team around you, you're just going to go, I'm going to get the music, put it on Spotify and see what happens. Which isn't really maximizing the opportunity for you to reach and build your fan base.
I think that happens a lot, doesn't it? Because artists put out the music and they spend all their time and effort and probably money as well getting it produced and made, paying the musicians, whatever. And now it's there, it's live. Now what? And obviously there's the things that come with Spotify for artists now where it's like you can submit it for their playlist consideration. But beyond that, it's like, what do I do? Where do I start? And it can be quite daunting, I think, because...
Yeah, I think so, because particularly if you're thinking of reaching, let's say, even 1 million streams, that's the goal you set for yourself, right? You need to be able to get that thing played 1 million times. And that can be quite daunting because 1 million people, wow, that's a lot of people. And sometimes, I guess, just from an encouragement perspective, that becomes a bit of an overwhelming task for one person to do as well. So the encouragement really is, if you are considering having, people, I would say, in your team, if they're freelance, they're their own people, but people who can assist you in achieving that, because it's very achievable with great music.
It really is. And I think it's about actually staggering it, basically. So rather than going, I'm going to try and be everywhere overnight, it's actually, okay, well, for the sort of, for acts that I've worked with, like, take just, it's normally having a staggered approach. So for the first single, and I say single because it's like, I talk about traditional single promotional cycles, but actually, let's just say you're putting out music. I don't even refer to it as a single. I'm putting out a song. I put it out on my streaming channels, it's available on digital platforms, whatever. Maybe for the first one, it's like, okay, this first one I'm putting out, just getting, my feet wet as an artist. And it's actually, if I get on 5 playlists for this track, that's great. As long as they're 5 playlists that are kind of in the right genre or in the right theme or the right aesthetic for sort of my art, for the type of artist I am. Okay. And then you build on that for the next one and build. And I think that's the thing that artists, I think, to realize that actually you can break this up into, for this first track, I'm just trying to get it on a few playlists and just get just a little bit of awareness, a little bit of followers. Then for the next one, I'm going to try and take that and build upon it and maybe get a little bit of blog coverage. Because once I do that, then I can say, oh, I had this nice little write-up in this blog. I got added to these playlists. And that starts to build a bit of momentum then. And then you can kind of start seeding that out to other people. And that's when you start creating, because to build the fan base, you have to get in front of people first. What you have to do is make your own, we've talked about branding in the episodes before, and Ben, that's something that kind of in terms of artist archetypes and artist identity, you're doing work for them way before that, like early on, so that they've got that, they understand who they are, they've got their artist brand defined, they've got their website, they've got their social media channels, they've got like a clear view of who they are. But now you need to get in front of people so that when they land on your channels, they then get who you are and can make the decision whether or not they want to follow you and they want to engage with you and want to learn more and be, become a fan. And I think actually, from a lot of my experience, and again, I'd like to get your thoughts on this, is they think it's going to be as soon as I get my track released through the sort of traditional label system, or even, if I get it on like one Spotify playlist or something, or it's going to just take off. And actually, working for artists I've worked, even when they are signed to a major label, they still, instance, looking at 5 Seconds of Summer, which is one of the bands I've worked with, it started from kind of like 2011, 2012 sort of, and it wasn't until 2014 we put out a official single. So before that, it was lots of releases, absolutely, but I'm not calling them singles because they didn't go through all the kind of, we weren't trying to achieve a chart position, for instance. So it was lots and lots of of releases on Spotify, on iTunes, on various platforms, little EPs, to get to the stage of being in a position to then kind of break through, I suppose, and then really be like, this is a single proper. That took a good few years to get to that stage. Do you get the sense that artists are in it for the long haul and get that, each time it's just about building up. Because the thing that just stuck for me, Amir, is when you said about it being daunting, because it is a daunting task. Because it's like, I want to be there, I want to be at the top of the mountain, and I've got the whole thing to climb.
Yep,
But actually, it's about each. I don't need to get to the top. I just need to get to this next little bit here, and then this little bit here, and actually breaking it down that way, I think, can make it less.
That's a good analogy as well. You know, you get to base camp, and then the other camp, and the other camp, and you're like, yeah, wicked. What do you think, Ben? Because you see a lot of artists in proper early development, don't you?
Yes.
So potentially,
Ben gets artists when they're like, I'm nowhere near the mountain.
yeah.
I've just left.
True.
I'm just thinking about leaving my house.
Sure. And there's a few things that are coming up for me as you two are talking, actually. And there's a big question mark here over, like, when is it ready? Right. And there's something about when you were talking about there were releases, but you didn't call them singles. There's something about labeling a thing a single and saying, right, this is the one where we're going to try and get a chart position, and naming it the single, where it's like, right, we're ready to go now. But all of those previous releases on the way to that place, there's a sense of like a snowball growing each time. And every single one of those little releases on the way is a chance to run round the plan, do, review cycle, and just check in that you're in the right ballpark. So that thing I was talking about earlier about the fans, and about how you might have an idea in your mind about who your fans are going to be, and then you start your journey, and so you say it was 3 years before the single was released. So that's 3 years of potential massive changes in terms of fashion, in terms of which social media platform is the up and coming one at the time, and so each starting little and just snowballing means that you can just keep checking in that you're on the right path, and you're testing and you're testing and you're testing. Also, I think the other thing as well is this thing about kind of building a list. Now I know this is an online marketing thing, right? Building a list. By building a list, what I'm really talking about is whatever mechanism that you've got, there needs to be some form of feedback, kind of back into the outfit, right? So if the aim is to get on some playlists, right, and you're doing some gigs, well, don't just do some gigs, right? Do some gigs and get some email addresses. Make sure you've got your socials all over the place so people can get in touch, and go and speak to your fans afterwards. In person or in kind of any way that you can. Now, don't go begging for opinions. I don't think. Like, don't be out like, oh, here's our next release. Did you like it? Yeah. Right. That's not cool, because what you're doing there is you're giving your fans there's more of a potential that they're going to start viewing you negatively if you give them the option to, right? And there's also a question about, well, you shouldn't be releasing anything if you're not confident in it, right? Whether it's a single or not, or an album or whatever, you should be feeling like this is, for now at least, the best that we've got, and so you don't want to be apologetic about it, but you can read in other ways whether you're on the right track or not. And by being on the right track, that doesn't necessarily mean changing your music. Like your music needs to be whatever's driving it. I saw a really interesting little snippet of an interview with Yaqub Collier the other day, and he used a really great phrase. He talked about he said you need to follow your goosebumps, right? And so as an artist, that's what you need to be doing. Like, if you're making music that's not lighting you up in any way, then you're in trouble. So be wary of kind of taking the feedback from the audience and then assuming that they're right and that you need to change. It's probably what's healthier is for you to be like, okay, so maybe that type of person isn't perhaps right. Like, it doesn't need to be.
Maybe it's not for them. Maybe this music is just not for them, and that's fine. Yeah.
You don't need to hate them. There doesn't need to be any animosity. You don't need to get into arguments with your fans. None of that.
Yeah.
But it's just, okay, I thought this kind of person was going to like my stuff, and I went and played a bunch of those venues, and the feedback wasn't that good. Then if that's going to happen to you, then you've got then a question to ask. Okay, so this is the best that I can do right now. Is it good enough? Or this is the best I can do right now, and I'm putting it in front of the wrong people.
The wrong people. Maybe I'm playing the wrong venues.
Playing the wrong venues. I've got the wrong idea in my mind about stylistically where I lie. The wrong idea, and like all of us are human. We can't just instantly know how the world is going to respond to what we do. So, allowing that slow build that you've talked about is really, really, I think, really key.
And that's the thing, because when you get that feedback, and you're in that reviewing mode, it's not just I've made the wrong type of music. It's I'm probably not putting it in front of the right people. So maybe I review where I'm putting it, and maybe I'm going to try and get it on a different type of playlist, and maybe I'm going to go after a slightly different. Maybe I'm not on the wrong, but maybe haven't found where my sweet spot is yet. Maybe I haven't found where, because there's an audience for almost everything.
If it's good,
If it's good, there is an audience for almost anything. There is some of the most niche music you've ever heard. Especially now with, you can find like playlists on Spotify and on Amazon, Apple, Deezer, SoundCloud. I'm just trying to name all of them. For almost everything, it really is. And even pre-streaming, there'll be like a basement of a record store where there's some, niche shelf of super niche stuff. There is an audience for anything. And if you can find those people and go where they are, it's sort of finding where your people are. And I think if you're happy with the music that you've created, you believe in it, it's then just, I'm not going to doubt myself. I'm not going to second guess myself and be like, I have to create a whole different type of music to get to these people. You need to go and find where they are. You just haven't found them yet. That's, I think, what it is.
Yes, yeah. And some of that might mean that you then make the decision, okay, because there are some really niche like genres where pretty much no one is making their sole living from just selling their own music, right? And then you then may end up needing to do some other stuff along the side, whether that's musical or unrelated. But like, make peace with that. Like if the fan base for your stuff is so limited because it's so out there, and yet the music that you're making like feeds your soul in the way that perhaps it ought to, then just like that's life, and find a way of making it work so that it makes up a portion rather than the entirety of your income.
Definitely.
So yeah, it's like, use this phrase like dipping your toes in the water each time. Just check, is it the right temperature? Okay, no, not yet. Right, well, let's have a rethink. I'll go and dip my toe in a different pool and see if that's okay, that one's right. I'm gonna put my foot in a little further next time. A little further, okay. So it's constantly upgrading and evolving, and believing as well. Like,
that's the thing. And I think it's hard to keep that belief, isn't it? If you're like, I don't seem to be getting any momentum with the music I'm putting out, because because obviously I think most artists are probably quite sensitive about the music that they put out. In maybe that's a generalization, but I think you want people to like it. Otherwise, but some people maybe don't. Like, I put it out, I really don't care. You can feel whatever way you feel about it.
Quite often people say that, and it's a kind of affront though as well, I think.
They still care. Yeah, because of course you want people to like it.
It's about connection, isn't it? It's, artists want to move people. It's the age old quote of, love it or hate it. I want you to feel something.
I want you to feel something. I want you to feel moved in some way. Exactly. Thanks for listening to Charting Tracks. We'll be back next week with part 2 of this episode. Until then, you can check out the rest of our episodes on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Charting Tracks. In the meantime, please feel free to message us with any of your questions or feedback. And until next week, thanks for listening.